FlyQ EFB from Seattle Avionics. Let's talk about what FlyQ EFB can do for those flying IFR. Let's begin with a simulated flight from Boston down to Delaware. So here we are, we're taking off, we're flying from the Boston area. The most obvious thing that you want to do is to take a look at approach plates. I realize you don't normally use an approach plate when you've just taken off, but bear with me. To pull up the information about an airport, there's a lot of ways to do it. You can type into the search box at the top of the screen. So I could type in BOS over here. Or I can pull it up in the flight plan, like this, and tap on Boston. Or I can double tap on the map. I'll double tap over the icon, select Boston, and there's some interesting airport information, winds on the surface and so on. But let's just move to the Procedures tab. I'll pick an approach procedure, and if that's not the one I want, I can just flip it left and right. Very easy to do. Let's see which one looks interesting. All right, let's say it was this approach I wanted. I can zoom in, zoom out, and so on. One of the nice things about the product is that you can also set it by simply tapping on here. A toolbar pulls up on the left. I can set the system now to track up mode, and I can center the map. Center the map is extremely handy because it means that instead of the aircraft moving over the approach plate while you're zoomed, which sometimes scrolls information out of view, it means that the plate will scroll while keeping the aircraft in the center. Very handy. You can do that either in track up mode, like I am now, or you can be in standard north up mode. Doesn't matter. On an airport like Boston that may have quite a number of approaches, you can also tap on the list button right here. And if you tap on any one, it switches to it. The list doesn't go away until you find one you want. Then you tap off it, and there you go. Now let's talk about the landing phase of our flight. Here we are. If we move the map a little bit, we're coming into Newcastle Airport in Wilmington, Delaware. Now a couple of different things that I can do if I want to pull up the procedures. Again, I can use my plans button to immediately jump to the airport information for my airport. I can double tap on the map, or I can enter in the ident. The ident for this particular airport is ILG. I hit the search box. And one of the nice new features is that we can hit a button that looks like a document, which is procedures, on the right-hand side of the screen, and jump immediately to the procedures for this airport. Again, as before, we can simply scroll left and right, see whatever procedure we want, and so on. Let's put one of these on the map. I'm actually going to use a list button because I want to pick the RNAV GPS runway 19 approach. And I'm going to hit the button in the upper right corner of the screen that looks like a map. That does exactly what you'd expect. Puts the approach plate on the map, just like that. Now, if we were actually flying along and you want to modify your flight plan, instead of doing a lot of typing, it's purely visual. For example, if I want to move my flight plan over the FESR fix, I simply press and hold on my flight plan line, drag it over a FESR, like that, or near a FESR even, is fine. Select FESR, and there you go. Your flight plan has now been modified without doing any typing or hitting any small buttons on the screen. Let's go to split screen mode by hitting the button in the upper left corner of the screen. Okay, now we have two different maps on the screen. I don't really want that, so I'm going to select Procedures down the bottom. I'm going to resize my map a little, and simply for visual clarity, I'm going to switch from an IFR low to a sectional map. This simply makes the approach plate stand out a little bit better. One of the nice things that the product will let you do is flip very easily between different approaches directly on the map. Instead of hitting a lot of buttons, if I don't need the RNAV GPS runway 19 approach, I swipe and look what happens on the map side of the screen. It immediately gets updated with whatever approach is on the right-hand side. Since we're in split screen mode, let's take a look at some of the other things that you can do. I'm going to go down to the left-hand side and show me what my nearest airports are. I do that by tapping the airports button twice. This is a very handy view for flying because it's constantly giving you an update of what the nearest airports are at this moment. It's an excellent emergency feature. On the right-hand side of all of these rows are 4 buttons. 2 of them in particular are very useful. The Direct To button and the Plus FP button. Those let you modify your flight plan, again, without doing any typing. The other 2 buttons, one that looks like a map, will jump the map immediately to that point, to that airport. And as we discussed before, the button that looks like a document below the map will show you the approach procedures for an airport that has one. Notice, for example, that 00N Bucks doesn't have a procedures button on it. It has an I button. That's because that airport doesn't have any approach procedures. Let's talk about how we would add an arrival procedure to this airport too. It's not just about approaches. I'm going to tap on Newcastle. Again, select my procedures. Let's go back to a map over here so we can see where we are. Now I'm going to go down to my arrival procedures. I'm going to pick one. I'm going to pick the Gyms 2 arrival right here. And on this, we can zoom in to read it and so on. But let's say that we simply want to add this to our flight plan. There's now, for SIDS and stars, there's a button in the upper right corner that says +FP, which is of course add to flight plan. I'll tap that, and when I do, I can choose the transition, I can choose my entry, and I can choose my exit. I'm going to go ahead and pick the DASHA transition, hit the button that says +FP in the upper right corner of this pop-up. Now when we flip back to our map, our entire arrival procedure has been added. Put differently, let's take a look at the plans page. And you can also see that the arrival procedure named has been added to the flight plan as well. So all that took was one tap to do it. Another great feature of the product, especially for IFR flying, because IFR pilots tend to fly at night more often than VFR pilots, is our night mode. There's a button on the top of the screen that looks like a half black, half white moon. Tap that. And the screen colors that are near black or near white get inverted. Doesn't happen to be the case on the screen here. But if you had any approach procedures that had colored terrain, the colored terrain would stay the correct color. We don't invert all colors, like triple clicking the home button on the iPad. Rather, we keep the colors colors and only change the black and white. Very convenient, very handy, and this definitely saves your night vision. Another thing that people really like to do on the product when they're flying IFR is to make sure that hitting the iPad doesn't mess anything up. To do that, we have a lock button. The lock button is just to the right of the search. I'll tap that. And now, you'll have to trust me on this, as you tap the map, or you tap the approach procedure, or hit any other button on the iPad, it doesn't do anything because it's now locked. This also locks rotation, so if you inadvertently rotate the iPad, the screen won't shift. To release the lock, simply hit the lock button again. Let's say that air traffic control wanted us to fly to the intersection of the Yardley, ARD, 139 radial, and the Robbinsville, which is RBV, with 249 radial. We can do that in a couple of different ways. We can double tap on the map at the intersection point, which may be the easiest, or we could type in the location if we wanted to. I'll type this into search. Tap here, ARD 139 radial, then the slash, and we'll pick the RBV 249 radial. Nope, I made a typo. RBV 249 radial, and hit search. It pulls up the exact point, and I could add that to my map. I can jump the map to that point, or I'm going to, in this case, use the +FP button to add it to my flight plan. So I'll hit +FP. It asks me where within the flight plan I would like it to go. I want it to go just before the landing airport, KILG. So I tap KILG, and there you go. Our point has now been added to the flight plan. Similarly, it's common to need to fly to a specific latitude longitude. You can also enter that into the search box. So I'll go into search. I'll type west 122.5, north 47.5. This is in the Seattle area. I'll hit the blue search button, and I'll hit the small map button that jumps the map immediately to that point. And there we are. Now we're in Seattle. Another thing that you want to do before any flight, and especially before an IFR flight, is to make sure that you've downloaded all the data that you need for the flight, because of course you can't download it while you're flying. To do that, we've made it very, very easy. There's a button at the top of the screen just below the time that looks like an aircraft taking off. I'll tap that. This is called the pre-flight checklist. It's a feature that we invented. It checks not only the data, but the GPS, the weather status, and so on. Green is good, red is bad. I don't see any red. So according to this, it looks like we're good to fly. We have all the data for all the states we need to fly. That said, I'm a little bit paranoid, so I want to show you another way to download data and to make another check too. I'll hit done. Next to the pre-flight checklist button, to the left of it, is a button that looks like a down arrow at the top of the screen. I'll click that, and this brings up what we call the Chart Data Manager. I'm going to actually zoom the map over here. Now, the magenta line shows us our flight plan line. So clearly the pre-flight checklist was accurate. Green is good, meaning that the green states are ones for which we've downloaded the data that we need for the flight. So that's fine. The problem is, if you look closely at the map, You're technically not flying into Pennsylvania or Maryland, but you're coming very, very close. So as a practical matter, as a safety matter, I would probably tap on Pennsylvania and I would tap on Maryland. And now I would begin downloading the data for those states as well, just to be on the safe side. FlyQ EFB by Seattle Avionics.